Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here are the things that I plan to use when I feed my worms today. The stuff that's in this jar is worm chow, and the stuff that's in this carton here is some just used coffee. And the systems that we're going to be checking in on are the ones that used to be covered with these pieces of cardboard. But since the systems were showing signs of perhaps being a little bit more damp than we want them to be, we decided 14 days ago when we last checked in on these bins to leave the covers off, let them have exposure to the air and just hopefully dry out a little bit. And today we're going to be checking in on them because it's always a 14-day interval between check-ins for these yellow buckets. They've been around for 236 days now, and they were fed 17 times. This will be their 18th feeding of coffee and worm chow, and the coffee worm chow combination is nothing new. It's what we've been trying to use as their feeding for a couple times now, just trying to make it into kind of a dry feeding approach, because like I said earlier, it was just a little bit too much dampness going on. Some of it even sort of soaked into these coverings, so hopefully we've got material in those systems that's more normal now. So let's get them up on the bench and see how they're looking. So now, at the age of 236 days, these systems in another 14 days are going to hit around nice round number, 250 days of age. And that'll be the day that they'll be due for the next check-in anyway. And I've been hinting at wanting to bring an end to these systems at some point soon. It's not because I'm out of room, technically, because there's tons of room in here. It's just because I feel a little bit cramped, and I do feel like I would prefer to be running worm bins and containers that I can more easily access, not have to sort of reach down and peer down into it from the side so I'm not obstructing the light for the camera. Silly little considerations like that. So now the last place we fed would have been over here where the coffee filter was, and it didn't feel too damp over here. It was on this opposite side. It felt like things got increasingly damp down here in the material as I made my way across. I speculated last time that maybe because of, the fact that it's sort of a deep container with lots of sidewall preventing any sort of air from moving back and forth, I suspected that maybe it would be kind of slow to dry off on its own. I thought that just uncovering things might not be enough. I've been wondering if maybe I would maybe benefit from blowing the fan across the top of these containers to keep the air moving. But then, all this material at the very bottom, fairly damp stuff, it's not going to really benefit from any movement of air. The only thing that would benefit that stuff is it being brought out to the surface to get a chance at drying. So we kind of broke tradition there. We didn't go after the side that was most recently fed to see how things look over there. That's usually my first point of interest, and that's what I do almost automatically without even thinking about it. But today I was more interested in just how damp is this stuff and what can I expect in terms of it continuing to dry as time goes on. I mean, it's not terrible. You could see if I crumble it a little bit, it tends to break apart. Perhaps not completely, but well enough to prevent any sort of major clumping. So maybe I'm just overreacting. I hate that, situation where the material in the bin won't, crumble like this, and it is just a big lump of overly damp stuff. But we're definitely not going to be doing anything to compound the situation or make it worse. In fact, I would have to definitely report back that maybe this is a little bit of an improvement over what we observed last time we checked in here. So maybe just a little bit more of the same will do a lot of good for the system by getting just a dry feeding right down in here. And last time I believe we actually included bedding, and I'm really wondering, do we or don't we at this point? Do we focus on just giving them some sort of nourishment and try to veer away from bedding type stuff? At this point, we can open this up again and drop the food in with or without the bedding, but I'm going to use the amount of leftover bedding on the other side as a way to determine whether or not I want to add more whether they've done away with what they were given last time, or is it just still just sitting here. I vaguely remember them getting a napkin placed in underneath the food at the very bottom. I don't know if I'm really seeing any significant signs of leftovers. Maybe what I just had here in my hand seemed like a few pieces of my prepared bedding that were sort of clumping together. Now I'm seeing more of it just scattered throughout the material. I pull my arm out and I get a little bit of light in. So the stuff's breaking down. It's all surrounded by castings in all directions, and it's full of worms. So I don't think we're steering towards harvest yet in this system, but I'm thinking if they need bedding, they can go there for it. So let's start weaning these guys off of fresh bedding and start focusing on just giving them food and running the system out to the point where we don't see any more residual stuff like that floating around. And then we could think about how we're going to separate the worms from the material they're inhabiting. So we'll treat that previous feeding as perhaps the last time we give them bedding in that form, or at least carbon food in that form. Maybe we'll figure something else out if we feel they could really use it. But at this point, I'm just going to be dropping in some worm chow and coffee, and that's all they're going to get. My worm chow is almost like a powdery consistency. You can see little splinter-like bits of the shells of the sunflower seeds I mix into here. This stuff just includes whatever I happen to have laying around, you know. I could have nuts, I could have beans, I could have seeds, I could have grains, I could have pretty much whatever. Leftover starch, flour, any of that sort of stuff. And then the coffee that I'm dumping in, it equates to about a day's worth of coffee there. Just blending it in a little bit with the surrounding materials and with the worm chow right below it. I want to save enough of the coffee to go around for the other two systems. But I think we can, I think we can add a little bit more. How much did we add there? I was looking the other way and I should have been paying closer attention, but that's good. A couple little dashes of nice yummy worm chow combined with some nice yummy coffee. If they need bedding, there's the leftovers. They can go back over for that stuff if they want it. And as far as feeding zone indicator goes, we're coming back in here with our coffee filter to show ourselves where we last fed. And it's on to the second bin. I just want to get these little creepy guys off the walls, get them down into the material. All right, let's head over to the next container. Bucket number 2. Okay, same story here for the most part, but I think now that we've kind of fashioned an approach that we can hopefully replicate, we'll do just that. Number 1 will just be to verify that the feeding from last time still has some leftover bedding materials, at least, if nothing else, and maybe even a few worms for us to check out. Look at them all. They're very busy down in here. And I could see bits of bedding, but not a whole lot of it. They're gonna make mincemeat of that stuff in virtually no time. Alright, but I still think we've got enough leftover bedding in here in case they need it, that we can just skip adding it today. Somehow my impression of the material we just pulled out of there was that it was maybe not quite as damp as what we saw in the other bin, but then again, what we pulled out that was really damp was, the material that we pulled out that was pretty damp was actually on the side opposite of where the feeding was, I think. Man, look at all those castings and how nice they are. So was it really this side where the excess moisture was? It feels a little muddy and clumpy. Let's see what the deal is. Ooh. Luckily here too, the stuff does break apart pretty readily, but it certainly doesn't seem to flow like what we saw on the other side. I think we'll do the same. We'll sort of help what appears to be the more damp material that's down low on this side, get it up in the upper reaches of the bin's contents. Hopefully let some of the more dry stuff blend into it. And then down into this hole before we cover up, we'll add the feeding, just like before. How did we do it? We put some coffee in, maybe we put some chow in first. Either way, I think we blended them together a bit with the surrounding materials. I think we have a little bit more coffee to spare for this system. We'll save the rest for the other one, and I think we were pretty generous at the end because we sort of spilled out more than we had intended to give them, but that was fine. Hopefully this feeding will suit them well, and if they need carbon food source, they'll just have to go back to that previous feeding where all that leftover shredded paper and cardboard is in here as well. I think they'll be just fine. So we're almost done here. It was kind of nice having sort of a game plan and just executing. As long as everything is okay. On to bin number 3. Okay. Oops. Now, here too, I'm assuming we'll be able to just follow suit with what we've been doing till now. Making sure they've got a little bit of leftover bedding in the last feeding area that they can turn to if they need a carbon-based food source, such as scraps of paper or cardboard or leaves or whatever it is that would be leftovers of the bedding they got last time. This is the leftover of some sort of like a mango seed or something, which they like here. And also noticing little clumps of stuck together pieces of paper and cardboard. They're sort of camouflaging themselves as just the material that's in here, but I could see it, so I think they're good from that aspect. So it's really down to just creating a space for us to put their food in. I wonder how the moisture down here is. Similar to what we've seen in the other systems, it's interesting to see how consistent things are from one bin to the next. We have been pretty vigilant in maintaining pretty consistent behavior and handling of these systems, so it's not too surprising, but I think we can plop in their food and we're done. I gave the worms a moment to dive, but this worm appears to be preoccupied with something. Is it my imagination, or are these worms coupled together and in the process of mating? Well, it's no surprise then that they're not fazed by me being here with the bright lights overhead. So let's let them get back to doing that. We'll get this thing fed. In can go. Wow, that was a pretty generous amount. I don't know if we need to put whole lot more beyond that in, and this looks like a pretty generous amount too. But I think previously we had just sort of gone through 2 waves of a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then a repeat. Here we might have just satisfied the quantity requirement in one felt swoop. Although I don't know why, it just feels like I can go with a little bit more worm chow. Alright, what's going on here? I didn't even notice I was disturbing this guy so much that he's got to go running across the surface. Let's get things covered up here. We're done. No more need to disturb these little guys. Try to get these little clumps of paper submerged under the surface too, in case they're needed or wanted. I'd really like to see very little leftovers of that stuff by the next time we come back in here, another 14 days from now. Feeding zone indicator belongs there, and we are finished. I've got a few things I've got to clean up and put away. But I'm not going to waste your time with that because that's boring. Before I go though, really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. Oops, is that working? You know what to do, and if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.